Two quadcopters cross the last strip of open ground at treetop height, and the men flying them are not aiming at the launcher. They are aiming at a single box sensor on its roof, the one component that makes a $50 million machine dangerous. The first drone goes in. The second follows 9 seconds later. When the smoke thins, the vehicle is still standing. It is also blind, deaf, and worthless. This is how Ukraine learned to erase Russia's best air defense, one shaped charge at a time. The open question is how they found a system its own crew had buried in a forest to keep it alive. That is the part the Russian crews cannot solve. You can hide $50 million of hardware under a tree line. You cannot hide the fact that you turned the radar on. And you cannot hide from a reconnaissance cycle that now runs for days at a time, watching, waiting, matching a heat signature to a shape to a spot on a map. In late March 2026, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces said out loud what its operators had been proving all winter. The enemy hides its equipment in forested areas, they announced, but it will not stay hidden. We find it and we destroy it. The equipment in question was a Buk-M3, one of the most capable medium-range surface-to-air launchers the Russian military fields. It had been tucked into a shelter belt in occupied Luhansk region, deep behind the line, precisely to avoid the fate that found it anyway. Open-source estimates put the cost of a single Buk-M3 launcher somewhere between $40 and $50 million. That figure is an analyst estimate, not an official price tag. But even the low end tells you everything about the trade Russia keeps losing. A machine worth tens of millions, hunted by drones worth a rounding error against it. This was not a one-off. It was one entry in a campaign that has turned 2026 into the worst year on record for Russia's Buk family air defense. Ukrainian drone units claim roughly 200 air defense targets destroyed since the start of the year, with 31 in the month of June alone. Strikes have been recorded across occupied Luhansk and Zaporizhia, and reaching over the border into Russia's own Bryansk and Kursk regions. The Luhansk launcher was the latest name on a list that grows week after week. What follows is how that list gets written. Start with the target, because understanding the Buk-M3 explains why Russia is so desperate to protect it and why Ukraine works so hard to take it apart. The Buk-M3 is a mobile, tracked, medium-range system built to shoot down aircraft, cruise missiles, and drones out to several dozen kilometers. Each self-propelled launcher carries 6 ready missiles in sealed canisters. The full battery includes command vehicles and radars, but the launcher is the piece that puts steel in the air, and it is the piece that costs the most to replace and the longest to build. A single Buk-M3 battalion can close a wide slice of sky. Positioned behind the front, it forces Ukrainian pilots to fly lower, strike from farther out, and accept more risk on every sortie. When one of these systems goes offline, a corridor of airspace that used to be lethal suddenly is not. That is the strategic prize. Not the medal, not the dollar figure, but the hole punched in the ceiling over the battlefield. Every launcher Ukraine removes widens that hole by another few dozen kilometers. The hunters in this story belong to Ukraine's unmanned systems forces. The branch stood up specifically to industrialize what began as improvised garage workshops. The Luhansk strike, by the force's own account, was carried out jointly with a separate deep strike unit. That detail matters more than it looks. It hints that the reconnaissance and the final hit came from different platforms, that this was a coordinated kill chain rather than a single simple drone run. One set of eyes finds the target. Another set of hands delivers the warhead. The two never have to be in the same place. It is worth being precise about what is confirmed and what is not, because credibility is the only currency this kind of reporting has. The Luhansk claim comes from the attacking side. It is a statement by Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, not an independently verified battle damage assessment, and not a report from the Ukrainian General Staff. The extent of the damage, any secondary detonations, the fate of the crew, all of that sits in the category of operator claim until footage settles it. What is solid is the pattern. Russia keeps parking these systems in the woods, and Ukraine keeps finding them there. Consider the geography the crew was working with. Occupied Luhansk is the northeastern shoulder of the Donbas, a landscape stitched with shelter belts, the long straight rows of trees Soviet planners planted decades ago to break the wind across open farmland. To a Russian air defense commander, those tree lines look like free camouflage. Drive the launcher in nose first, throw netting over the canisters, let the canopy break up the silhouette from above. For years, that was enough. The forest was a friend. In 2026, the forest became a filing system, a set of predictable addresses where the hunters knew to look. Because a Buk-M3 is not a quiet neighbor. It is a tracked vehicle weighing well over 30 tons. Getting it into a tree line means crushing brush, cutting sight lines, and leaving track marks in the soil that a good camera reads like a signature. Keeping it fed means fuel trucks and crew vehicles coming and going on the same farm track, day after day, wearing a path that was not there a week earlier. And using it, actually switching on the radar to threaten Ukrainian aircraft, means broadcasting an electronic pulse that other systems can hear and bearing on. The launcher wants to be invisible and dangerous at the same time. It cannot be both. That contradiction is the whole game. A Buk that never turns its radar on is a very expensive parked truck. A Buk that turns its radar on to do its job announces roughly where it lives. The Russian crews try to split the difference, powering up in short bursts, relocating between chutes, trusting the trees to cover the gaps. Against a slower reconnaissance picture, that shell game works. Against the picture Ukraine now maintains over the occupied rear, the gaps keep closing. Somewhere in late March, over one particular shelter belt in Luhansk, they closed completely. The first FPV crossed nothing yet because the strike is not where this begins. It begins days earlier with the patient, unglamorous work that decides everything. This is the part audiences rarely see, and it is the part that actually wins. Before a single warhead flies, the launcher has to be found, fixed, and confirmed. Finding it means separating one hidden vehicle from thousands of ordinary tree lines. Fixing it means pinning coordinates precise enough to send a drone to. Confirming it means being sure the shape in the woods is a Buk and not a decoy, because Russia salts the map with inflatable and plywood fakes to soak up exactly this kind of attention. Reconnaissance drones fly high and slow over the occupied rear, feeding video back to analysts who study it frame by frame. They look for the tells the crew cannot erase. Fresh track marks curving off a farm road into the trees. A rectangle of shadow, the wrong shape for a tractor. Netting that catches light differently from leaves. The faint scar where brush was cut to clear a firing arc. Any single sign means little. Stacked together over several passes on several days, they draw a box around a specific point in a specific tree line, and that box becomes a target. There is a Russian commander on the other end of this, and his assumptions are the second half of the story. From inside the tree line, the position feels safe. The launcher is dozens of kilometers behind the contact line, well outside the range of the short tactical quadcopters that terrorize the trenches. The canopy hides it from above. Local air defense is supposed to swat down anything that comes hunting. Every one of those assumptions was true 2 years ago. Each one has quietly expired. The tactical drones got longer legs, the reconnaissance got sharper eyes, and the deep strike units learned to reach targets the trench drones never could. Here is the midpoint that reframes the whole engagement. The most dangerous thing about hunting a Buk-M3 is not the Buk. It is everything Russia parks around it. A launcher this valuable sits inside a protective bubble of shorter-range air defense, electronic jammers, and watchful crews, whose entire job is to shoot down the drones sent to find it. Getting a reconnaissance platform close enough to confirm the target, and keeping it there long enough to matter is a duel of its own, fought quietly in the days before anyone sees an explosion. The strike is the easy part. The looking is what gets you caught. That is exactly what came next. To understand the finish, look at a second, separate case that Ukraine documented in detail, because it shows the method with a clarity the Luhansk report only implies. This is a different event, a distinct strike by Ukraine's 14th separate UAV regiment at its own time and place, and it should not be blended into the Luhansk incident. But it answers the question the Luhansk footage leaves open. How exactly do you defeat a machine like this with drones that cost almost nothing by comparison? The 14th Regiment's answer was a genuine two-step kill, and the sequencing is the lesson. Step 1 did not target the missiles or the radar. It targeted the wheels. Operators first struck the launcher's mobility, crippling its ability to drive away. A Buk that cannot move is a Buk that has lost the shell game. It can no longer relocate between chutes, can no longer melt back into a different tree line, can no longer buy itself time by simply not being where it was last seen. Pinned in place, it stops being a moving target and becomes a fixed address, one the operators can return to on their own schedule. Step 2 was the amputation. With the launcher immobilized, the operators flew 2 FPV quadcopters, each carrying a shape-charge warhead directly into the 9's 36M fire control radar. Not the vehicle body, not the missile canisters. The radar module itself, the eyes and ears of the whole system. A shaped charge is built to punch a concentrated jet of metal through armor, and against a delicate sensor array it is catastrophic. Two of them, placed on the same module, did not scratch the paint. They permanently blinded the system. Think about what that means in cold terms. The missiles were probably still in their canisters. The chassis was probably still intact, and none of it mattered. Because a buck that cannot see cannot shoot. The most expensive part of the machine is not the steel or the propellant. It is the ability to detect a target, track it, and guide a missile onto it. Take that away and everything else is dead weight. The 14th Regiment did not have to destroy $50 million of hardware. It only had to destroy the few square meters of it that made the rest work. That is the shift Russia has not answered. The old logic of air defense assumed the threat came from above and from far away, from aircraft and cruise missiles the radar could see coming. It did not assume the threat would come from a two-man crew, flying a first-person camera through the tree line at the radar dish. The Buk-M3 was designed to kill things moving at hundreds of meters per second at altitude. It was not designed to survive a slow, cheap, precise object arriving at its most fragile component from the direction of the ground. The system's greatest strength, its sensor, is also its softest target. Return now to the Luhansk shelter belt, where the pattern played out in its own way. The launcher had been located over repeated passes, its position fixed to a point in the trees. Its identity confirmed against the decoy problem. The joint strike, one unit finding, another delivering, meant the crew had no single warning to react to. By the time anything crossed the canopy, the coordinates were already old news to the operators. Whether the finishing blow came from a long-range strike drone or a short-range quadcopter, the effect the force claimed was the same. The hidden machine stopped being hidden, and then it stopped being a machine. Picture the last minute from the operator's side of the screen. The video feed steadies on the shelter belt, the shape resolving out of the shadow the analysts had been staring at for days. The vehicle sits nosing under the trees, canisters angled up, netting doing exactly the job it was supposed to do and failing at the only job that mattered. There is no evasive move to make. A 30-ton tracked launcher cannot dodge, cannot sprint, cannot hide any harder than it already is. The crew's entire survival plan was to never be found. That plan expired the moment the camera locked on. The Russian reaction to a strike like this is almost always the same, and it is almost always too late. Crews at these positions have seconds, not minutes. The first sign of trouble is usually the drone itself, and by then the geometry is already decided. Jammers might scramble a control link if they are running and pointed the right way. Point defense might catch a drone if a gunner is awake and looking at the right patch of sky. But a system built to engage fast, high threats is poorly suited to a slow one skimming the treetops. And the very camouflage that hid the launcher also blinded its own crew to what was coming. They chose concealment over awareness. Concealment does not shoot back. Whatever the precise damage in the Luhansk case, and that remains an operator claim until footage confirms it, the strategic outcome of these strikes does not depend on the drama of the explosion. A Buk-M3 that has been hit in its radar, or its missiles, or its chassis is out of the fight whether or not it brews up in a satisfying fireball. Some of these systems burn spectacularly, canisters cooking off in secondary detonations that throw missiles into the trees. Others simply go dark and get towed away for repairs that may never come. Both outcomes end the same way on the balance sheet. One fewer launcher covering that patch of sky. That balance sheet is where the asymmetry becomes almost absurd. On one side, a system valued at $40 to $50 million, built over months in a specialized plant, crewed by trained specialists, defended by a bubble of supporting equipment. On the other side, a pair of quadcopters that cost less than a used car between them, assembled from commercial parts, flown by a two-person cell operating out of a dugout. The exchange rate is not close. It is not even in the same universe. And it repeats week after week. Across the entire occupied rear. Multiply it out and the campaign comes into focus. Roughly 200 air defense targets claimed destroyed since January. 31 in June alone. Strikes reaching from occupied Luhansk and Zaporizhia across the border into Bryansk and Kursk, hitting Russia's air defense inside Russia's own territory. Every one of those engagements runs the same math. A cheap, expendable drone trades up against an expensive, irreplaceable machine, and Russia has no way to make that trade profitable. You cannot build Buk launchers as fast as Ukraine can build FPV drones. Nobody can. The Russian answer to this has been to hide harder, and the Luhansk case is the proof that hiding harder has stopped working. Pull the launchers farther back, push them deeper into the forests, move them more often, turn the radars on for shorter and shorter windows. Each of those measures buys a little survival and costs a little capability. A Buk that hides deep in the rear is not defending the front. A radar that only powers up in brief flashes is not tracking much. Russia can keep its air defense alive or keep it useful, and increasingly it cannot do both at once. The hunt has forced that choice. Listen to what the intercepts and the Millblogger posts describe, and the same anxiety runs through all of it. Russian channels covering the war have spent the year complaining about exactly this problem. The way deep strike drones have made the occupied rear feel as exposed as the front line. Positions that were comfortably safe in 2023 are now inside the threat envelope. Crews that once rotated through quiet rear postings now watch the sky the way trench soldiers do. The psychological weight of that is its own kind of attrition. When even the $50 million assets in the deep rear are not safe, nothing feels safe. There is a human cost on the losing side of these strikes, and it belongs in the record as fact briefly. A Buk-M3 launcher carries a crew of several. When a warhead reaches the vehicle body or the canisters detonate, the men working the system do not always get out. In the Luhansk case, the crew's fate is unconfirmed, and it should stay that way until evidence settles it. But across the campaign, the arithmetic is plain enough. Every launcher removed from the Russian order of battle takes trained specialists with it, and trained air defense crews are harder to replace than the vehicles they operate. Those crews were not conscripts dragged to a border they never chose to cross. Russia's air defense specialists in the occupied territories are contracted professionals, men who signed up to operate these systems on someone else's land for the pay and the trade. They took the posting behind the front believing it was the safe assignment, the one well away from the drones and the shelling. The forests were supposed to keep them alive. Each one that gets found in the trees is a reminder that the deep rear of an invasion is no longer a safe place to invade from. Step back to the strategic level because that is where these strikes actually register. Air defense is the connective tissue of Russia's whole position in Ukraine. It protects the logistics hubs, the command posts, the ammunition dumps, and the airfields that launch the glide bomb sorties pounding Ukrainian towns. Every Buk removed thins that protection. Thin it enough in enough places, and Ukrainian aircraft and long-range drones find corridors they could not use before. The 200 air defense targets claimed this year are not 200 isolated trophies. They are 200 small holes torn in the roof over occupied Ukraine, and the roof is starting to leak. Remember the 2 quadcopters from the very start of this story, the ones flying not at a launcher but at a single box sensor on its roof. That image is the whole doctrine in miniature. Ukraine is not trying to outbuild Russia's air defense. It cannot, and it does not need to. It only needs to reach the few fragile square meters that make each machine work, and it has learned to reach them with tools that cost almost nothing to lose. Immobilize the wheels, blind the radar. Let the rest of the $50 million machine stand there in the trees as a monument to a plan that no longer works. The forests of occupied Luhansk are still full of shelter belts, and Russia will keep driving its launchers into them because it has no better idea. There is no camouflage net that hides a track mark, no canopy that muffles a radar pulse, no tree line so deep that a patient reconnaissance cycle cannot eventually map it. The crews will keep choosing concealment over awareness, and the hunters will keep turning that choice against them. Somewhere over Luhansk right now, a slow camera is drifting above a row of trees, matching a shadow to a shape to a spot on a map. The enemy hides its equipment in forested areas. The unmanned systems forces said, "It will not stay hidden. We find it and we destroy it." That was not a boast. It was a description of a system that already works, applied to a target worth $50 million, defeated by drones worth almost nothing. The Buk-M3 was built to own the sky. In the tree lines of eastern Ukraine, it discovered that owning the sky means nothing when you cannot survive the ground.